Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar on how to build a career in financial research. This webinar is part of our How to Build Your Career series. I am Nikita, 2013 batch. I am based in Singapore, and I'll be your moderator today. Before I get into the discussion, I'd like to highlight something. I'm Kozhikode, and its global alumni community celebrated the Institute's 25th foundation on August 21, 2020 by kicking off a year-long Silver Jubilee celebration with a string of events leading up to the 25th anniversary on August 21st, 2021. Join us in these celebrations by subscribing to the alumni social media handles and channels. Now, today we will be talking about financial research, which is a broad term used to refer to analyst roles in the financial services industry, broadly divided into equities or stocks and fixed income or bonds. Of course, there are more exotic or sophisticated asset classes and transactions as well. We'll talk a bit more about each of these specific fields through our session. We have a very esteemed panel joining us from across continents. Our session today is divided into 5 segments. We will kick off the discussion with an introduction. We will then talk to the panelists about their journeys, how they got into financial research, most important skills and competencies that they picked up through the years, and most important career moves. In the third section, we will address some key questions, followed by a fun rapid fire round. And lastly, we'll take some questions from the live audience. Let me do a quick introduction of the panel, starting with Amit Harchandani, 2008 batch, joining us from London. Hi, Amit.
Hello, Nikita.
Hi. Next, we have Arjun Chakrapani, 2003 batch from London again. Hi, Arjun.
Hi, Nikita, panelists, and all of you guys.
We have Manish Shukla, 2006 batch, joining us from Mumbai. Hi, Manish.
Hi, Nikita, and hello to everyone joining us now.
Next, we have Nishant Nunn, 2005 batch, joining from London. Hi, Nishant.
Hi, Nikita, and hi to everyone who's watching now.
And lastly, we have Puneet Jain, 2006 batch, joining from New York. Hi, Puneet.
Hello, Nikita, and hello to everyone.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. To kick off, we would like you to tell us in one statement, why would you encourage someone to consider a career in financial research? So, starting with you, Amit.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and hope all of you and your loved ones are safe and healthy. Pleasure to be on the panel. Before I move on to answering your question, Nikita, if I may just clarify that all views on this webinar are my own and do not reflect those of my employer. To answer your question, I would encourage someone to consider a career in financial research, as it provides an individual with an opportunity to evolve into an influential and respected voice in financial markets, with an optionality to fast track onto senior roles in corporates, institutions, and the buy side.
Thank you. Arjun?
Sorry, guys, I went on mute. I'm a little new to this platform. I think we speak as one for all the panelists when we talk about disclaimers. We are exhibiting our individual opinions, and by no means do they reflect the opinions or the views of our organizations. Hopefully, the remaining 4 do not need to provide this disclaimer. The reason for getting into research in general would be to get into a role wherein you are challenged, where you are challenged to provide solutions, primarily from your knowledge of a particular field. When I say a particular field, finance itself is very wide. We have macro research, which normally covers quite a few asset classes in general, but most of the researchers, besides the macro research guys, would have very specific niche of specialty. And one of the reasons I got into research was I looked at it as a long-term career, wherein over a period of around 10 to 15 years, you would develop almost a postdoctorate level of knowledge in a particular field, and it also gives you the optionality to move into particular super specialities within a field. So that was my primary aim when I got into research. Thank you.
Thanks, Arjun. Puneet?
Yeah, no, thanks, Nikita. And so let me say like my own nerdy response to this. I'd say like the job is intellectually stimulating. There is like a lot of fun in tackling an industry problem, something that everyone's trying to figure out, doing an analysis, publishing your conclusion. So that said, I mean, we do monotonous work, but there are a lot more opportunities to dig deep and do something really interesting, to explore something new.
Thanks, Puneet. I'll go to Nishant next.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll kind of mirror what Puneet said. I mean, my reason for getting into research was I kind of saw it as a very nerdy, kind of a job spec where you kind of sit almost in like a library and kind of tapping away on your computer, doing bringing up numbers and doing a lot of analysis. But I think the more time you spend here, I think there kind of it's multiple layers of an onion. You peel one and then you reveal something else. So whether you're analytically minded or you love interacting with people, whether the CFOs or the CEOs of the world, or you love taking sort of a risk management role, I think that there are all these aspects that come as part of being a research analyst. So anybody looking for a career, as an analyst, it's not just about sitting with an Excel spreadsheet and just trying to pump out numbers. I think there are a lot of different kind of aspects to being a research analyst.
Thanks, Nishant. Manish?
Yeah, just to add to what Nishant said, right? I mean, analyst job is way beyond financial analysis and Excel modeling. You need to be good at storytelling. Storytelling could be by way of the research that you write, or when you interact with the investors all over the world. So that does bring out the best of you in very various ways. And it's one of the most competitive jobs around. I mean, it forces you to be on your toes. You just don't have to be faster than others. You also have to be better than others. So you'll always be on your toes, trying to improve yourself. I think you'll have a lot of learning as you go through your career.
Thank you, Manish. And thanks everyone for sort of setting the stage as to what we would be discussing throughout this session. Going into our next segment, we would like to hear a lot more about each panelist's journey, and probably I'll turn to Amit first. And Amit has an equities background here. So Amit, over to you. If you could tell us a bit more about how somebody can get into an equities research field from the campus itself, and if somebody is looking to do that through campus, what kind of skills and what kind of competencies do they need to build up to bag that role on campus?
Sure, Nikita. I'll probably maybe spend 3 to 4 minutes talking about my own journey and then answer the question. So I'm originally from Mumbai. Growing up, science, maths, and in later years, programming were 3 of my interest areas. So this drove me towards doing a engineering bachelor's in information technology from the University of Mumbai. After 3 years of working in the software industry, I joined Kozhikode in 2006 to pursue my MBA with an intent to broaden my skill set. I can safely say they were the 2 of the most cherished years of my life. Over that period, I primarily took up finance and strategy electives, and a career in equity research was one of the options on my shortlist, but by no means was it a key focus. However, come final placements, Lehman Brothers came to campus and offered me a role in equity research with the potential opportunity to join one of their technology sector teams. So I just went for it and soon found myself working with Lehman's European technology hardware equity research team. However, this was June 2008, and we all know what happened next. Thankfully, Japanese giant Nomura took over Lehman's operations in Europe, including the staff supporting Europe in Mumbai. After 2 strong years of performance, my senior analyst based in London was convinced that I merited a place alongside him rather than in Mumbai, and I moved to London in 2010, towards the end of 2010. In 2011, my senior analyst moved to Citigroup, and I was presented with 2 opportunities: either assume lead coverage responsibilities at Nomura or potentially take up the offer made by Citigroup to join my senior analyst. I chose Citi because I was convinced Citi was a bigger and broader platform. In 2012, moving on, the industry went through some tough times, and as a part of a significant restructuring exercise, I was actually presented with an opportunity to assume lead coverage responsibilities for 2 important sectors at Citi: European tech hardware and European tech software. Now, typically, these are separate teams on the street, and the associated workload was significant. But then I just went for it back then in 2012. I thought I had nothing to lose. The next 4 years, up until 2016, were probably the most demanding of my life, as I was easily clocking in 14 to 16 hours daily, often working weekends. But I had 3 things going for me. I was covering a sector that I've always been passionate about and making steady progress building up my franchise. I had an extremely supportive family, particularly my spouse, who, by the way, is a batchmate from Kozhikode. And last but not the least, most importantly, never stopped believing in myself and ignored the naysayers. Ignoring the naysayers is something that all of us have to live with as analysts. After that period of strong acceleration up to 2016, I do believe the subsequent 4 years have been slightly better in terms of work-life balance. I do believe I've established myself as a voice in the market. More importantly, the team around me has become stronger with experience. And lastly, Citi as an overall research platform, in my humble opinion, has made significant strides. So that's very briefly my equity research journey. Some excitement, some luck, lots of hard work along the way. Let me move on to answering the other question now, which is, what can students do during their 2 years to build requisite skills, knowledge? You can almost think of this in 2 parts. What skills can they build to get into equity research? And what skills can they start developing that would potentially help them become more successful down the line in equity research? In terms of getting the job itself from campus, lots you can do, but 3 things I would point out to. Firstly, develop and work on your logical reasoning skills. Secondly, you don't need to be a finance god, but yes, please do ensure your basic concepts of finance are clear. And last but not the least, do participate in discussions in the classroom and develop the art of making well-substantiated arguments. As an analyst, it's often about how substantiated your argument is. It's all about being influential. And then with regards to the skills that you would need later on to become successful as an equity research analyst or as a financial research analyst, it's all down to soft skills. But maybe we can touch upon that over the course of the panel later.
Thank you, Amit, for that very comprehensive opening. And I'd like to turn to Puneet now, who again has an equity research background. So Puneet, if you could tell us in a succinct fashion, what is equity research and what does your typical day or week look like? And how did you get into this field?
Yeah, no, equity research, like as the name suggests, like you analyze companies and give recommendations on stock or equity to institutional investors. You think like these days in era of Robinhood traders, everyone is a trader. Everyone has a stock recommendation, but an equity research professional They typically go deeper than an average Joe. They analyze industry trends, company-specific trends, build model to forecast companies' earnings potential, then compare earnings growth with the stock level valuation to give like the stock recommendation. And on a high level, like a typical day would involve like either you working on an Excel, updating, building like a financial model or a framework for analysis, or you writing a research note, or talking to companies to share ideas, or talking to investors, or your internal sales trading to share your thoughts, share your views. And I'd say it really depends on what time of year it is. Work is highly cyclical. Most companies report earnings or their quarterly results at about the same time. And as an analyst, that's the time you typically update your model, share views on the recent results. So there is like a significant load of work around earnings season. But most of the times when you do not have pressure to publish, it's a lot more laid back. You try and tackle long-term projects, something you wanted to analyze but don't have time during earnings. And to be honest, there are times when you can sneak in like a Champions League game during workday. That also happens.
Thank you, Puneet. Let's change gears a bit, moving to Arjun. Arjun is in a more exotic field of research, which is quant research. So, Arjun, if you could tell us what is quant research or quantitative research? What do you do in a typical day or a week, and how did you get into this field?
Right. So banks employ quantitative analysts, not researchers, analysts in a pretty broad spectrum. Some of them work on the risk management side, some of them work on pricing, some of them work with as desk quants, and nowadays there are quite a few who actually look to provide insights to clients using their quantitative methods and techniques. So this last category is basically what we call nowadays as quantitative research per se. They, as a bank, it's very important that, especially in the sales side, that the sales and trading, structuring, and research all uh, work well together, share ideas, and ensure that our clients are getting the maximum level of value out of what the bank has as a broader team. So within quantitative research, as I said, we are looking at providing insights using quantitative techniques, but what do we do? Now, quantitative research itself is very broad. You could have people who work on, say, pure data analysis to look at relative value trades in a broad spectrum of markets. So you might have certain arbitrage opportunities which are not immediately apparent to people who are looking at screens, either Robinhood traders or even slightly more advanced screen analysts. We might have multi-asset research. So looking at quantitative research is essentially you are asset class neutral. You don't need to have a specific in-depth knowledge in any one asset class. Like say, you could treat MBS as equivalently as say equity stocks, because at the end of the day, you're looking at the time series as a very a secular number. So quantitative research is about providing that providing the value to the client in terms of okay how different asset classes are going to behave in the future. As in everything with research, we are looking at forecasting the future, and we are looking at using quantitative techniques to forecast the future. That's it from my side.
Thank you, Arjun. Moving on to Nishant. So, Nishant, you have a credit background. If you could tell us what is credit research? You're also a trading desk analyst, and if you could just weave in that aspect as well. And how did you get into this field? I think you're on mute, Nishant.
Sorry, my apologies. So yeah, like I started, a lot of people are quite familiar with what equity research is because, even in countries where the credit itself or bonds itself are not a, well-known asset class, people still know how, probably the share market works. So there's a whole different world, within fixed income. You have foreign exchange, you have government bonds, you have credit, which is essentially corporate bonds. So I work within the corporate bond space. And in terms of how I started my journey, I think I actually joined SBI Caps in investment banking from the campus, and then subsequently moved to Lehman Brothers, their back office research operation in Mumbai. So quite similar to what Amit did. Of course, Lehman happened, the bankruptcy happened, and I joined. We were moved on to Nomura after that, and then after a few years, I moved to London and joined the credit research trading team here in London. And I think for me, one of the sort of the key kind of the fork in the road, so to speak, was the bankruptcy. I actually started out as a publishing credit research analyst, working for the U.S. Credit markets. But during all this bankruptcy kind of related turmoil, I got an opportunity to work with Europe as well. And the way that the model was different between US and Europe was US was a very traditional, publishing model, similar to what a lot of people on the equity research do. In Europe, actually, the research analysts did not publish as such, but they would sit on the trading desk with the traders. Now, why is that important is because usually for publishing analysts, there's a very clear distinction, what we call a Chinese wall, i.e. that the research analysts cannot share their trading views with the traders prior to publishing them for the wider audience. So, for example, if I have a view, I say I want to buy Google, for example, until I put out that view in published form out to the general market, I cannot actually walk down to my trader and say, hey, you know what, I think this is a buy. And so the key difference is I, as a desk analyst, I sit right next to the trader, and I'm primarily serving the trading desk, not the wider market. And so we typically tend to position on a particular credit or on a particular business before we actually go out with our view to our clients. So our clients actually know that when we are talking to them on a particular credit, that we are in a way already positioned on that particular credit. And therefore, I cannot hold myself out as an independent research analyst. So that's I think a key distinction between what publishing analysts do and what I do as a desk research analyst.
Thanks, Nishant. That was really helpful. And if I can give in some perspective from the ratings part of the credit research, because I've always been a rating analyst since I started working. A bit like some of the other panelists mentioned, it was not intentional, as in I never thought that I should get into ratings or credit research, to be honest, but I was pretty firm that I need to go into the financial services industry. So I had a lot of finance subjects, etc., and pretty much everything what the panelists have mentioned so far did concentrate on logical reasoning and honing those skills. I got a job with CRISIL from campus, and that I worked there for a couple of years. It when you talk about ratings, it again sounds like a very again a very specialized field where you probably imagine yourself sitting on your desk and doing a lot of Excel analysis, etc. But in the first year itself, I realized that there's lots to it, and we can speak about this more in details later as well. It was a pretty much client-facing role where you're speaking to senior management in the first year itself. So in that sense, I really liked the field that I got thrown into by chance. And then a couple of years later, I moved on to the parent, which is S&P. It's a global rating agency. So yeah, that's how I started working here. It was definitely something which I got from campus, but ended up really enjoying as a job. So okay, moving on to our next question. And this is probably a lot of people would have on their minds, and uh, and this is something which is very widely discussed as well, as to how important is CFA to this particular field of financial research. And probably I'd first turn to Manish. And Manish, if you could tell us your experience or your view on whether CFA is important in this field.
Sure. As far as equity research goes, I think CFA qualification is definitely a big plus. The advantage of that program is that across the three levels, you practically cover all the aspects which are relevant. While one could argue that it is not a necessary condition to have a CFA and to make a successful career. I mean, I know enough and more analysts who are reasonably successful but have not done the CFA. But if you do the CFA program, the rigor of the program and whatever you cover during those three levels will definitely give you an edge during your career in sell-side research. That doesn't necessarily mean that you do it on campus while you're studying. I mean, I hear stories of engineering grads, for example, these days pursuing CFA before their MBA. I think that is stretching things a bit too far. But yes, through the course of your career, having the CFA qualification will definitely help. And as you move jobs, I think some organizations like to have filters, MBA from top institutions. So CFA could be a filter there, and that will help you there in making those lateral shifts also.
Thanks, Manish. Arjun, turning to you, if you could tell us if CFA is important in Quant.
Why did I do my CFA? Let me start from that. I did not have a finance focus during my MBA. And at the time I graduated, finance jobs were becoming more widespread with the amount of offshoring happening to India. So that's when I realized that a CFA is going to be useful. And I do agree that the rigor of the CFA gives you a lot of, it allows you to cover a lot of bases right across asset classes, right across different kinds of markets. And there are quite a few things which you may not have done at your MBA, or you may have forgotten from your postgraduate diploma, which you study with significant rigor because you need to pass the exam at the end of the day. It's not like just clearing a course. It's a very competitive digital result. Whether it helps in a quantitative research role, I'd probably say no. Simply not because I'm kind of reducing the value of the CFA. It just happens that the core aspects, the requirements of a quantitative researcher is probably more on the math side, is probably more on the statistics, and nowadays more on the artificial intelligence side. Data analysts, and these are the core skills, and we expect these analysts to pick up on the finance angle on the job. So if I was going to market today to hire for a team, the CFA is not necessarily one of the key considerations I'd have. Obviously, it's a positive, but definitely not a filter.
Thank you, Arjun. Turning to Nishant, and Nishant, your views on CFA for a credit research career.
Look, I mean, I haven't done my CFA. I think, yeah, I mean, I would sort of agree with Arjun. I mean, I don't think it's definitely not a filter. You find a lot of roles which would kind of advertise, you need to be a CFA/MBA. So as long, I mean, we are all MBAs. I've never come across a case where somebody says, oh, so and so person is not a CFA, and so that's kind of a roadblock to hiring that person. No, I don't think so. Plus, on the question of whether people pursuing their CFAs while doing their engineering, I mean, I don't think that's something I would go for. I mean, I think the real value of CFA is once you start a career in finance, because the theoretical base that CFA builds goes in conjunction with the practical experience of a job. I mean, if you have done your CFA, maybe, I don't know, while you're doing your engineering, and then you're looking to start a career in you're 3-4 years down the line. I think that disconnect between that theoretical knowledge and by the time you actually go to applying that applying that knowledge in practice, to me, the value of that CFA would actually diminish quite a bit. So yes, I mean, if you're already in a finance role, particularly in the credit research role, and you want to do a CFA, do it by all means. But yeah, I mean, it's I think to me, it's more of a personal choice rather than some sort of a compulsion.
Right. Thank you, Nishant. We'll go back to Arjun again and answer this aspect on how to get in laterally into the financial sector or financial research space. And Arjun, we understand that you have moved in from a different industry and then into a global bank. So if you could talk about your experience a bit and how was the lateral move for you? How difficult or how easy was it for you?
Okay, I certainly will, but I think it's a very different world from when I moved in and what it is now, especially into quantitative research. Now, when I moved in, it was a lot of flux. So when I graduated, we had just got out of the dot-com issues. I'm talking about 2003. So 2002 and 2003, your jobs at campus, at placement, was a little bit of a lottery. So it was not that you could have a particular career target and you got the choice of career you wanted. So it was a little bit of just getting into the job market. Let me talk about lateral hiring in quantitative research roles. Now, quantitative research by itself requires a lot of core knowledge. We're not talking about MBA level knowledge. We're talking about core knowledge in certain aspects. Like you could have natural language processing. Now, natural language processing is not something you're going to understand to any true depth in, say, an MBA. For that matter, you're probably not going to get it even in an MS. You may need to get a PhD, and it's very difficult to scan for candidates at PhD programs around the world. So lateral hiring becomes almost a natural requirement for quantitative research programs because we are looking at people who are able to bring in a new skill set into a relatively dynamic, knowledgeable team. And the skill set might be very different as well as be very similar to what the team is doing. And if it's going to be very different, like when I say NLP, I'm talking about something like text-based data analysis, natural language processing. So looking at news feeds and trying to develop a investable algorithm. Now, when you talk about investment algorithms, you're essentially talking about mainly quantitative ideas. Like you'd look at momentum, you look at carry, you look at different factors and kind of build up some kind of a concoction as an algorithm. But if you look into NLP is totally different. So to come back to your question about lateral hiring nowadays is a very significant amount of influx into quantitative research roles, mainly because your typical grad hiring scheme of banks and other financial institutes would not provide you with those kinds of skill sets. So lateral hiring is definitely there. And when it comes to quantitative research, there are researchers who move from very different fields. Like I know a couple of colleagues of mine, one who's in geospatial analysis. That is, I'm talking about, he used to work for companies which used to produce GPS. So the amount of intelligence which goes into your GPS software is significant today, and that kind of skill set is used in financial research. You might think, what the hell is common between GPS and financial research? There is, because when you abstract it to the layer of answering a question based on the data which is presented to you, the field in which you were working in becomes a little irrelevant. So that is why lateral hiring becomes so key, because you're not looking just at hiring from your own financial sector or your gig sector, you're looking at a totally wide range of potential candidates, which means your filtration as an organization when you select these candidates are super important. You need to have very fine filters as to how you kind of refine your searches to pick these candidates up. But I'm sure that's not of any interest to you people, because the audience is mainly going to be students. So probably a couple of words on maybe what some of our audience might find relevant to your question on lateral hires is that do not worry if you're in a totally different field. If you're in IT, like you don't need to be in finance to get into quantitative research. It is by no means a criteria to get in, because one thing which we have learned the hard way, I've been here for 15 years, learned the hard way is that we used to apply filters. Okay, they need to be an MBA, they need to be a CFA, or they need to come from a financial background. And we realize we're losing out on a lot of candidates as a result of that. So last word on lateral hiring for people in this audience. You don't, if you are interested in the markets for any reason, like for your personal investment choices as such, and you generally want to get into the markets, it is your core quantitative abilities, your core quantitative skills, which actually matter. Not your experience and knowledge of the financial industry, because that's something which we can slot you into relatively easily. We have significant amount of expertise in slotting people in. Thank you.
Thank you, Arjun. Probably turning to Manish on the same question on lateral hiring. Also, Manish, while we have you, if you could give us some color on how you moved from SBI Caps to JPM, because we understand that you started off at SBI Caps, a smaller kind of a brokerage house, and then moved on to a more global bank. So if you could talk about that move as well.
Sure. So on the lateral aspect, in equity research, as you progress through your career, what matters is your understanding of the industry or the sector that you're tracking. Because you'll always have juniors or associates who'll do the Excel spreadsheet modeling kind of work for you. So anyone who has good in-depth industry knowledge can make a decent career out of equity research. And I know a couple of friends of mine who moved in from, for example, working with consumer companies, and they are now sell-side analysts at local and global banks. Right? They made that shift because they knew the sector. They worked for the consumer company for 3 to 4 years, and then moved in laterally to cover the specific sector. Obviously, basic financial knowledge is required, but that does get covered in the 2-year B school course. So I don't think that's necessarily lacking. And whatever at the margin you need, you can always learn on the job. But your knowledge of the industry is what helps you. Going back to your question, Nikita, on my move. So from campus, I joined SBI Caps, and I was working with the project finance team at SBI Caps. That was actually a pretty short stint. And in about 4 months, I moved from SBI Caps to JP Morgan. I had interviewed with JP Morgan when they were on campus. Now, obviously, when companies come to campus, they have restricted roles in terms of numbers that they can offer. But as I was working at SBI Caps, I didn't necessarily get too excited about project finance, or I was, let's say, itching, so to say, to get into equities. So I got in touch with the manager who was on campus again. And because I had had multiple rounds with him and we had interviewed, and I was, I think, on the wait list as well, the follow-on was not that difficult to do. And interestingly, as it happens, a few months after leaving the campus, they had a position and they hired me. So in that sense, having prior interview on campus with the same person who was making the recruitment choice did make a difference. But at the same time, there are enough and more colleagues of mine from SBI Caps who stayed back in project finance and have done pretty well for themselves. It's just that for me, I thought equities was, so to say, my calling, and decided to make that move.
Thanks, Manish. Moving to Amit. Amit, if you could quickly, for folks on campus especially, tell us what is the biggest difference between a career in financial research versus investment banking or portfolio management? You're on mute, Amit.
Apologies. So I think if you look at the three options you've talked about, financial research, investment banking, and portfolio management, they require the same core skills, but the difference comes down to how significant is the weight of each of those skills in those career paths, and how does that play to your strengths. To keep it simple, if I could distill down those core skills to maybe three. Firstly, it's about developing insights, qualitative and quantitative. Secondly, it's communication and influencing. And thirdly, it's travel and networking. If you look at financial research, in my humble opinion, influencing and communication is probably 40% of what you do, with insights and travel and networking being about 30% each. If you're looking at investment banking, travel and networking is probably for me the key skill set there. 50% of the time you would be doing that, probably a bit more as you get senior, with insights probably 20% and influencing 30%. And it changes completely when you go into portfolio management, because in portfolio management, you're putting real money to work there. You're responsible for your positions. So you're obsessed with getting your insights right. It's probably 3/4 of the time. That's what you're doing, trying to meet everyone and come up with those insights to pull the trigger, put the money to work. You don't have to spend a lot of time influencing or networking. Companies come to you if you have the money to put to work. So I think that's the difference between the three career paths, and you need to decide what is it that you want to do, what is it that you're good at, and then you can pursue whether it's research, banking, or portfolio management.
Thanks, Amit. That brings us to an end to the second section that we had. And just to wrap up with some key takeaways that our panelists shared with us today. So first of all, build your knowledge through finance subjects. You could look at CFA in early stages of your career, or when you're just about to start for CV building. Build your logical reasoning skills. We also heard that you can move laterally in this field if you're interested. There are various aspects to this field. We heard about equities, we heard about credit, we heard about quant. So don't think that if you don't get placed through campus in this field, you will not be able to move later into these roles. You can very well do that if you build those skill sets for yourself. So okay, let's move on to the next section. In this section, we'll answer some hot burning questions, and again, we'll do a round robin to start with. If everyone could share with us what was their single biggest career accelerator till date. I'll start this time with Nishant.
Well, I think to me, and I'm probably being a little flippant here, but it was the Lehman bankruptcy. And that sort of gave me the opportunity to move from a publishing analyst role to a desk analyst. And, having sort of occupied both seats for a fair amount of time, in hindsight, I think that was the right decision. I'm really enjoying what I do.
Great. Thank you, Nishant. Manish?
Yeah, so more than accelerator, I think it's the enabler. And in my case, I think the two shifts that I've had my career, moving from India Infoline to Deutsche and from Deutsche to Citi, both those moves happened because I happened to know the people who were working in those firms. So the point about networking has come through multiple times. I think networking has been the bigger career accelerator for me, because I was aware of these job opportunities before they hit the job market or the headhunters. So knowing the right people, I think, has made the big difference in at least the last two career moves that I've had.
Thank you, Manish. Puneet?
I'd say, I've been JP Morgan lifer, so not many changes in my career. But one thing that helped me a lot was back in 2008, 2009, during like the financial crisis. There were layoffs happening everywhere around us. And that time, like I doubled down in my commitment to work. So, which helped me establish myself like in a new country in equity research in a new role. And that's something I believe still helps me a lot. So to double down commitment, you can't outsmart everyone else, but you can sure outwork others. So that has helped me a lot.
Thank you, Puneet. Arjun.
I've been a lifer as well with Deutsche Bank, and so for me, it's more about understanding the challenges which the bank itself has had over the last 7 to 8 years. I'll not speak much about it. Everyone knows about it. So it's about how research itself has changed in relation to the challenges that the bank has faced, and how my role has changed as a result. So it was more about navigating these forces, these buffets, the buffets of external forces on the bank, and figuring out what next to do, figuring out which would be sustainable as a business model, and 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 just staying put. I've always focused on staying put and trying to add value, because staying put is not easy sometimes. Sometimes people think that okay, moving jobs is the challenging bit. Sometimes even staying put is the challenging bit. So there is a different angle, but I think yeah, that's all I've got to say.
Thanks, Arjun. Amit.
In my opinion, if you look at financial research, it's a 3-step journey. It's an exponential curve. You start as an associate, you move on to a publishing level, and then you finally move on to heading the team. And therefore, I do believe when you really move on to heading your team, the picture changes completely for you. You can't be behind anyone. You're suddenly running your own pseudo-entrepreneurial venture, if I could call it that way. So yes, in 2012, when I assumed lead coverage responsibilities for both sectors, and as I said, there were quite a few who thought I was crazy because I was 4 years out of campus taking on these 2 roles. But I think that's probably, in hindsight, proven to be the defining moment of my equity research career so far.
Thanks, Amit. Okay, our next question is on moving overseas, and we can't not ask this question to this panel. I think most of us are joining from overseas for this. So maybe Puneet, turning to you, how did you move abroad, or would you have any tips or advice for anyone looking to move abroad in this role, and how challenging do you think it is today to make such a move given the tough immigration environment in most countries?
Yeah. So I joined our offshore research center. We call it GRC from campus. And I worked for a US based analyst and moved within the same team in 2007 with JP Morgan. So I'd say like moving to US or more generally abroad, either like find a job from campus, like if there are like firms that are recruiting for uh, uh, positions like in New York, London, Singapore, wherever, I'd say that's one option. Other option, I would say like you go and work for a US analyst or like a broad-based analyst, and whether work with someone directly, indirectly, be visible, prove your value, and if there is like a position in their team, they'll call you, they'll hire you. That happens a lot, but it's not automatic. And more recently, like you mentioned, Nikita, recent immigration environment, especially in the US, has been tough. It has made it extremely hard. I got to be honest. I know like analysts where there were positions in the team, the analyst wanted to hire the person, but they just couldn't because of visa. But that should not deter you. That should not deter anyone. Like, it still happens. Most of you going to have MBA in finance. That helps in getting around visa rules. So I'd say, yes, visa environment is tough right now, but also remember, it's cyclical. It was not tough 4 years ago. It may not be tough at all in 4 years from now, or even heck in next year. So don't let like visa or immigration environment deter you at all. But to get to like a role with a US based team or with UK, Hong Kong, Singapore, you got to have visibility with the analyst if it's not directly through campus, in my view.
Thanks, Puneet. And maybe we can check Arjun's views on this topic as well. So, Arjun, if you could share your experience on this.
Okay, I moved from Bangalore to London in 2000, at the beginning of 2007, after working for Deutsche Bank for 2 years in an offshore environment. So pretty similar to what Puneet spoke about just now. I was not working for an analyst. I was working for a bigger group. The way quantitative research was kind of designed was that you normally work for a bigger group, larger group, that rather than have an analyst who has an offshore analyst mirroring him. But this was again many years back when overseas positions were significantly more attractive than what I think they are today. If a person really wanted to move overseas, I would think that they should. There are two routes. One is looking at doing a course abroad, maybe a master's or something like that, maybe a 1-year course somewhere abroad, which introduces you and opens up far more opportunities for you to work abroad. And otherwise, look purely at your career in an overseas in a company which has a lot of overseas opportunities, which would be any multinational company, banks, consults, etc., etc. And you will get it. If you really want it, you will get it. I don't think there is any one way in which you can work towards it.
Thanks, Arjun. That's helpful. Moving on to our next question, and this is on specialization. Most of us are specialists, by the way, for the audience. We've been tracking the same sector for a really long time, but we have Nishant here, who is kind of a cross-sector person. So, but first, let me just move to Manish and check his views on how you see this specialization aspect of this job. What are the pros and cons in your opinion?
Sure. So, I mean, that's a big debate which always one would have, because sectors tend to be cyclical. They come in fashion and go out of fashion quite often. So to that extent, having multiple sector exposure will always be beneficial from a career perspective. But that also means that you would need to put in that extra effort. You will need to really work hard, put in those extra hours to wear those multiple hats. But it will make your career, let's say, recession proof. If I were to give analogy from Indian equity markets, way back in 2007-8, infrastructure, real estate were the real darlings of the sector, and we had some of the hottest IPOs in the country then. But subsequently, because of the economic slowdown, those sectors fizzle out. So if you had chosen only those sectors as your career move, it could have been counterproductive. My specific example, financial services as a sector in India has grown over the years. I mean, 10 years back, it was only essentially banks. Today, you have banks, NBFCs, life insurance, asset management companies. So while I'm called a financial analyst, there are definite sub segments within that, which kind of helps you go on. So diversifying is obviously advantageous to the extent that your job provides that opportunity. I think one should try and do that.
Thanks, Manish. And turning to Nishant, because Nishant, you look through the sector. So if you could share your views on the pros and cons there. And if you made a switch from being a sector specialist to a cross-sector analyst, how did you make that switch, and how easy was that for you?
Look, I mean, I was never really a sector specialist for a great length of time. I mean, like I said, I did start with publishing research, and yes, we were even back then. I was looking at probably 3 different sectors actually, and gradually, as I moved into a desk analyst role, I think by design, because your part of your role is also managing risk. For the desk, you are also kind of, in some ways acting as a check on the trader. You can't really afford to be a sector specialist. So that's one. Secondly, like I said, I personally found, getting sort of siloed in one particular sector quite boring, to be honest. So I think that there are challenges with having this, cross-sector focus, because when you have got, literally about 100 different names to look at, it can be quite challenging in trying to figure out where to spend your time on, because time is a precious commodity. So I think that there are quite a few challenges in looking at names across a wide variety of sectors. So yes, you don't get that necessary level of sector specialization. But then I think what I personally like is that you get a lot of diversification. And what you are also able to demonstrate is your ability to kind of dip in and out of different sectors, different names, different situations. So I think that sort of nimbleness itself is what you get as a skill, rather than your expertise or lack thereof in particular any particular sector.
Thank you, Nishant. Turning to Amit. So, Amit, when we hear the word financial research, we have a mental picture of this person sitting on a desk and crunching away numbers on Excel. I personally feel it's a bit of misjudged or a misnomer there. But your view on how important soft skills are in this job?
Couldn't be further from the truth, sitting in desk and just crunching numbers. If you were to take a step back again, and I'm trying to think of this very broadly because it's such a broad spectrum here, but if you're looking at financial research at a very high level, it really comes down to 3 components or parts. First is domain expertise. How well do you know your space, be it credit, rates, sector, multiple sectors, right? So that's one. Then it's your technical expertise. How good are you in fundamental analysis, technical analysis, natural language processing, forensic accounting, you name it. And thirdly, relationships. Put it all together, it ultimately comes down to being influential. It's all about being influential when you're in financial research. Now, if you take a step back and you think about these 3 dimensions which are coming together, if you start with domain expertise, you need soft skills. To build your domain expertise, you need to interview, you need to listen. If you're looking at technical expertise, it's very important to be self-aware of yourself, your team, and of course, relationships is obvious, right? It's all about network building, adaptability, potentially awareness of what others are thinking around you, and last but not the least, credibility. So from my perspective, soft skills are massively important if your end game is to be influential, and that what drives success in financial research. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Amit. Moving on to the other very important question, and we should definitely address this, and that's on the work-life balance in this field. So probably turning to Puneet, how would you describe work-life balance in this field?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Work-life balance is very important to me. I transitioned to working from home about 7 years ago to improve exactly this, to improve my work-life balance. So now I've been like a research analyst, but I can also have breakfast and dinner with my family every day. So that's something I'd say you can do in equity research. And tech obviously has improved a lot over last 7-10 years. It allows me to be virtually in New York while physically being in Chicago. And I'd say with COVID-19, this trend is going to accelerate. But even for folks in New York, I would say like the work-life balance is in equity research is much better than what it is in some other areas like investment banking. I know like a lot of associates and folks who joined research from those fields just because research was provided them chance to spend time with family and friends. So I'd say work-life balance in equity research is definitely much better. There are times, especially during earnings, when you work really hard, but most other times it's not that difficult.
Thanks, Puneet. Turning to Nishant for the same question. Nishant, how would you describe work-life balance in credit research? And you have a slightly different role of a trading desk analyst as well, and that could be really challenging. How do you manage work and life in that sense?
So I think that there are, again, I agree with Puneet that, you've seen quite a few lateral moves over the years where people move from investment banking into research just because they can't handle that kind of work pressure. So I think one, it's also down to individual choice. I mean, if people feel that they're fine, driving themselves 16, 18 hours a day, then by all means, maybe investment banking is probably monetarily a more lucrative career. But from a research perspective, I think what I also found between being a publishing analyst and a desk analyst is the fact that being a desk analyst, you are a lot more tied to the hours of the trading desk. So if trading starts at 8 a.m. in the morning, you probably have a 7 a.m. start. But once the trading closes at 4 or 4:30, then you're kind of more or less done for the day. Whereas with publishing, because you always are under this pressure to put out an X number of reports on X number of different companies in a certain amount of time. My view is that as a desk analyst, your work-life balance is much better than if I were on the publishing side.
Thanks, Nishant. Moving on to a more fun part of this job, which is giving media interviews. A lot of us get quoted by media in print or get asked for a live interview. So it's a part and parcel of this job. And probably turning to Amit to give us some bits from his experience on that front.
Well, I think going on TV is always exciting, but admittedly also a bit nervous because you don't want to say anything remotely divergent from your published views. The experience has been good. I won't deny that. The first time, obviously, you're just checking everything. My hair is in the right place, the tie is looking all right, and so you're a bit self-conscious. But once you've done a few of those, you feel all right. It's like any other thing in life. You are a bit more nervous the first time, and then it starts getting easier. But what is most important is we as analysts sometimes, and I'm certainly guilty of it, can come up with very long and elaborate answers. Whereas on TV, you have to be very short and very punchy to get the message across in 1 or 2 sentences. So that's what I would probably leave it at that. But yes, definitely exciting, and over time you get better at it.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Very exciting, but most of the times you're thinking what not to say rather than what you should be saying. Anyway, okay. Next question is for Manish. So, Manish, as you move at the higher echelons of your career, you need to manage a team as well. And in this field, in your opinion, what are the particular skill sets that you need to manage a team?
So equity research by design is a reasonably flat organization. So when you start off, you are an associate, you work with a lead analyst, and then you have the head of the team, who typically would be a managing director equivalent role. So to that extent, it's a very flat hierarchy. And going back to an earlier question on work-life balance, for an associate, unfortunately, your work and life both will be initially determined by your analyst. So you should hope and pray that the analyst that you work with believes in work-life balance for others, not just for himself. But that was on a lighter vein. But yes, having learned those lessons through the career, what matters is, as I said earlier, that I have the good fortune of working in a sector which has expanded over a period of time. So there is enough and more work to be done. So first and foremost is to ensure that everyone is gainfully occupied in terms of the work which is going on. And at the same time, we don't create any silos, in the sense that today we are a 4-member team in financials at City Research. If one of us is away for any personal reasons or otherwise, the work should not get disrupted, right? So you need to have enough redundancies built in terms of everyone knowing what needs to be done and how. And gradually over a period of time, the aspiration for the associate would be to become a junior analyst and start covering some stocks and eventually become the lead analyst, right? I think giving the team members those kind of opportunities are critical. Else at some stage, people would choose to move out. Now, unfortunate part of our corporate life is that many a times you can provide those opportunities, other times you can't. But I think that's how life goes on. But I think, yes, giving people the right platform so that they can build on to their careers is, I think, something which is very critical.
Thanks, Manish. Let's move on to exit options from this field, and I'll turn to Arjun for that first. So, Arjun, what are the common roles that you can transition to from a quant research background, and what are the skill sets that you can take into that role? So what are the most important skill sets that you would have picked up now, which will be important for the next level?
Unfortunately, I can't think of options besides the buy side. So as a quantitative researcher, you could transfer your skills in terms of if you're a portfolio manager on the buy side, you would need to understand what you're buying, right? What you're managing. And as I always say, it's research for me has always been about forecasting the future. So I can't look beyond hedge funds, private money managers, etc., etc. The buy side.
Thanks, Arjun. Turning to Nishant. Nishant, your perspective on this from the credit research side.
I mean, I don't think the exit opportunities are that different from those for an equity research analyst. So one is obviously the buy side. You go into a hedge fund, you go into a real money asset manager, whether as an analyst or maybe as a portfolio manager. The second, I would say on the sell side is you can if that's something that suits you, transition into the role of a trader. Now that's not for everybody. It's certainly not. It's not for me. But that's definitely an exit option. And then once you're a trader, then obviously you have more opportunities in terms of moving directly into a portfolio manager role on the buy side. The third, I think, which a lot of people I believe in this field tend to ignore, is you can move into in sort of a lateral movement into information businesses like Bloomberg, for example, or Reuters. I mean, I know of people who have done that lateral move, who know how the financial markets work, and companies like Bloomberg and Reuters are actually quite keen to hire people directly from as a research analysts or traders, because they need that market expertise to build their products and such that their products are actually relevant to the market. Plus, they also need people who can actually go out to their clients, which are eventually banks and asset managers, and kind of speak that same language. So I think that's one other option for research analysts.
Thank you, Nishant. And on the equity side, Puneet, if you could give some color on exit options.
So the most common exit option, like Arjun mentioned, would be to join like a buy side, like a long only or a hedge fund. Those people essentially do very similar job to like a sell side research analyst, There are differences like Amit talked about, but at the core, the job is somewhat similar or most similar. More recently, as buy side has become tough, seen people going to investor relations or within the CFO office of corporates. And the idea is, you know the investors, you have the relationships, you know how stocks move. So there is like a natural fit in with IR role within corporates. Then some also noticed like some of the senior analysts, like some of the senior folks, they go into strategic roles within corporates, like an advisor to CEO, chief strategy officer. You know the industry, you know the industry trends, you know what other firms are doing. So what you bring to table as from an outsider's perspective, I believe, is important. So for most part, people go into buy side, but corporates have emerged as more common than rare as an option, as an exit option for research analysts.
Thanks, Puneet. So that brings us to the end of this section, and thank you so much, panelists, for sharing those insights with us. Our next segment is a fun rapid fire round, and probably starting with Arjun. Arjun, what was the most useful course or skill you took from business school? And this is a rapid fire round too, so please give us a quick answer on this. Thank you.
It was SAPMs by Uday Damodaran. As rapid as I could be.
Thanks, Arjun. Moving to Manish. So, Manish, what do you like most about your job, and what's the least?
So in the pre-COVID world, it was travel. I would end up traveling anywhere between 7 to 8 weeks a year to meet investors overseas. That allowed me to not just travel, but meet people from different backgrounds. That does help a lot. And the least, I think Puneet has touched upon it, earnings season is something which you dread the most, especially if you have a single day on which 3 or 4 or 5 of your companies are reporting. We know for sure that it's well past the midnight on your schedule that day.
Right. Amit, what's the one quality you look for in a person when you're hiring?
If I had to distill it down to one quality, it would be attitude and the cultural fit within the team, given how closely knit operations we run. Any form of aptitude, I believe, can be developed over time if the person has the right attitude and fit within the team.
All right. Nishant, what is the most important quality for being a successful analyst?
You better be lucky than smart.
Thank you. And last, for Puneet, and that's if you weren't in financial research, where would you be?
Be collecting unemployment checks, to be honest. No, I'm kidding. I believe like corporate finance would be like a natural fit to what we do. So somewhere like in CFO office, taking investment decisions, corporate finance roles, I think that would be interesting.
All right, thank you. Now we'll just again do a round robin, and if each of the panelists can tell us what would be the last piece of parting advice you would give to anyone who wants to build a career in financial research. And starting with Manish. Manish?
In early years of your career, you need to be resigned to the fact that hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Right. So in early years of your sell-side research career, you need to be prepared to put in really long hours, and that is where the learning curve is. But gradually, things do improve, and as you migrate to a junior analyst to a senior analyst, life does become much better, and you do get a lot more exposure. But the grinding that you do in the initial years is what lays the foundation for your career going forward. So the first few years in sell-side research is not what the rest of your life is going to look like. So just use that as, so to say, baptism by fire.
Thank you. Amit?
Parting piece of advice. This might sound like a cliche, but I can't think of any other career where it's not more true. Stay hungry, stay foolish.
Thank you. Nishant?
I think, if you're looking for a career in financial research, I won't be too fixated on getting a job in research, right from the start. As long as you know what the general direction of travel is, whether you go into, you go into tech or you go into marketing, as long as you develop some sort of sectoral expertise, you can always sooner or later come back to a career in financial research. So, like I said, don't be too fixated on it. Just focus on building a good career.
Thank you. Arjun?
Two things. One is get familiar with programming. Python is a good place to start. Don't underestimate the number of fields in which you'll find that useful as you go on with your career. And two is, specifically from a research perspective, think about where you would place your own hard-earned money.
Thank you, Arjun. Puneet?
I'd say it's not daunting. Don't be discouraged. Like if I could survive, anyone can. And I'd also say IMK prepares you well for this career, like the long hours, research, and analyzing stuff. None of that feels difficult after 2 years at IMK.
Thank you, Puneet. Okay, that was fantastic. We have some time for taking live questions from the audience as well. And we have our first set of questions already in, and really, really relevant question in this environment. So this is on impact of technology on research jobs. So here it goes. Is financial research limited to using Excel or involves using languages like R or Python? What role will learning these languages play in future? And we have a related question. Do you think AI and machine learning is a threat for finance or financial research jobs? So maybe turning to Arjun for this.
Okay, think of Python as something like Excel was 10 years back. It should be your main thing in your toolbox for data manipulation. So Python, especially for people who are passing out or in the early years of their career, think of it as one of the primary tools in your kit. How is technical change influencing careers in financial research? I can only think of it as an enabler. Do not look at it as a disruptor that, okay, these AI jobs are going to come and take away roles. No. It's only going to make this job more enriching. And remember, you're in a constant battle. You are effectively in a zero-sum game in financial research. You need to be better than the other person. This is not a growing pie. So it's better to embrace technology rather than look at technology as something which takes away jobs. It's here to stay. It is what it is.
Thank you, Arjun. Turning to Manish. Manish, any views on this topic?
Yeah, so you can't wish away from the fact that technology is impacting the way we do business, and it's happening across industries. I'll totally agree with Arjun that you should look at some of these as tools in your toolbox. Data science, data analytics is going to increasingly become more and more important in a research-oriented field. But I think what matters from an analyst perspective is his knowledge of the industry, the analysis and analytical skills that he brings to the table, and what he or she has seen in terms of covering the sector over a long period of time in terms of cycles, and the softer aspects of interacting with the management and trying to, so to say, read the tea leaves, right? As some of those will be some time away before technology can replace those things. So as long as you can use technology to assist you at the margin, I think you can do better than what some of the others are. Will those replace the jobs? I seriously doubt it if it will be like for like a replacement. Yes, I mean your job could become easier if you start using these technology tools.
Thanks, Manish. Amit, I guess you'd like to add into this.
Sure. If I may quickly comment on that, artificial intelligence at the end of the day is a function of data sets. And it would go down to the point I made earlier about developing quantitative insights. So certainly when AI comes in, it will accelerate the process of making quantitative insights. But you still have to come up with your qualitative insights. The point Manish made about experience and having lived through the cycles. If machines could do everything, the hedge funds would be making a lot of money year in, year out. That's not the case. So it all comes down to developing your insights. And let's not forget, in sell side, it's all about communicating and influencing the other stakeholders and networking. Those aspects won't be changed by AI. So AI is your friend. AI will change a lot of roles, a lot of jobs out there. But at the end of the day, if you think of AI as a friend, that will only help you get ahead of competition in the zero-sum game that Arjun referenced earlier.
Thank you, Amit. We have our next question, again, a very, very, very relevant question for this panel. And this is on how do you deal with recommendations of views which turn out to be wrong? So who should I turn to? Puneet?
Yeah, no. You can be right at all times. More often than not, I mean, you're wrong, actually. But you got to be intellectually honest. I'd say like that's the key thing. You talk to same people over and over again. I've seen like a lot of people, they try to interpret data to fit with their worldview, to fit with their opinions and thesis. Got to be honest. Try when you are set with new set of information. If it is different from your view, it's okay to admit, hey, we were wrong. And I think people appreciate that. So I'd say it's okay to admit you are wrong if your recommendation was wrong, instead of trying to defend the wrong thesis, because people invest real money based on your recommendations, and they remember that.
Okay, thank you, Puneet. Okay. And also probably let me turn to Nishant if he wants to add something from the credit research side on, your recommendations or your calls or your forecasting going wrong. How do you deal with that?
Well, let's be honest. Nobody expects you to be right 100% of the time. And a big part of the game is that you make much more noise about the things that have gone right for you and things that have gone wrong. And I completely see Puneet's point of being intellectually honest. And yes, you have to, at times own up to recommendations that have gone wrong. But it also to what Amit has been talking about, that, it's about influencing and how you communicate with people. So as much as it's not, I would say, I'm not putting my answer in a kind of a moral straitjacket and saying, yes, if you're wrong, you stand up and own up to it. But I think it's a lot about how you communicate the things that have gone right and how you try and how do you communicate when things go wrong.
If I may just jump in, Nikita, and just make a point. When things go wrong, it's actually an opportunity for you. Because often when things go wrong, sometimes people might try to sort of not talk a lot about it. But clients are smart. Don't think they are dumb. They understand when you've got something wrong and you're trying to not talk about it. So I would rather talk about it, explain my thought process, and say at the end of the day, these inputs did not go right for me. No one takes a decision knowing all variables on hand. There's a leap of faith involved in any call, buy side or sell side. But as long as the process you followed is good and you can substantiate to a client it was the way you did it, that only builds credibility. And I can say this from personal experience. Clients respect you if you own up and say things have gone wrong, but I'm learning from it and this is what I hope to do better next time.
Thanks, Amit. While we have you and Nishant on the line, another question we have is how much of a weightage would you give to economic indicators compared to signals of the market, especially keeping the current market scenario in mind?
Amit, you want to go first?
Sure, Nishant. So with regards to economic indicators, at the end of the day, as a sell-side analyst covering a particular sector, your core expertise that you bring to the table is bottom-up analysis of your individual stocks. There are economists in the team. There are strategists in the team who would spend more time looking at some of the top-down signals. But that still has to be factored into your thought process, because part of getting the calls right is not just fundamentals, it's also valuation. And that is a relative context within the wider market backdrop. There are forces beyond your control. I mean, if the Fed decides to get the rates down, the market multiples will expand, your stocks will go up. So yes, economic indicators matter, in my view, when it comes to calling the cycles, when it comes to calling valuations and what are the right price points. But I think from your perspective, at the same time, it's important to focus on bottom-up fundamentals as well, because that's where you bring the real expertise to the table.
I mean, I think I would slightly, obviously it's a function of roles, but because I'm part of a trading desk, we have the saying, the market can be wrong longer than you can be liquid. So yes, I can completely understand why as a publishing analyst, you are very much focused on the fundamentals, but as a desk analyst, I need to be quite cognizant of what the market itself is doing. So for me, any trading recommendation would also need to keep in mind the direction of the market move and what we broadly term as the technicals. So I think that's quite important for me.
Thanks, Nishant. I have my eye on the clock, and probably we'll take the last question. And this is on the courses that can be introduced into the B schools to make learning more relevant based on how changes have happened in this industry over the last many years. And you guys have spent so much time in this field over the last several years through cycles. So probably turning to Manish. Manish, what's your view on this?
Yeah, I think as was touched upon earlier, data is going to play a lot more role in any research analyst job. And any kind of introductory course around data science and data analytics, the various tools which are available at the disposal of an analyst today, and maybe a initial introduction to Python as a language, because Python is relatively easy to learn. It is limited by your ability to use all the libraries which are available for you to really deploy that. So I think getting your head around data, analyzing those data, and making those data presentable, I think those are the courses which one can look at, given the way the pace at which the world is changing. And data doesn't have to be only economic indicators, right? These days, data are, for example, price trends on Amazon website, or flight ticket trades, or peak hours, and all sorts of data which is available in terms of web scraping. Now, obviously, there are tools available in the market, but how to interpret that data and how to make best use of the same, I think would help people in their role as research analysts.
Thank you, Manish. Okay, so thanks everyone for joining us on a Sunday evening. Big thank you to our live audience. We hope you found this useful, and we've been able to successfully convince you to not be scared of the financial research jobs or roles. A big thank you to our panelists for joining us from across continents at this time and sharing your insights and experiences with us. Thank you so much. Stay safe and take care.